Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to take a few moments to make sure we're admitting everyone from the waiting room and allowing others to join. So we'll be starting in just a few minutes. If you have joined us, we kindly ask that you update your name on the Zoom to the name that you registered with so our team can then identify you for the question and answer session during tonight's workshop. Please note that we are recording tonight's workshop for future viewing on the ESD website for those that can't join in person or, live tonight. So by participating in tonight's workshop, you are granting permission to have your name, voice, and likeness recorded. Everyone for now has been placed on mute. Please know that we will walk participants through a phone and Zoom overview once the workshop is open, so there'll be time to ask questions during that portion. You can email Sharon at carpstrategies.com for any technical issues. For those of you that are just joining us now, hello, welcome. We're just allowing a few minutes for everyone to join before we get started. Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to repeat myself one more time, so bear with me if you've already heard my spiel, but thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started in just a minute. We're continuing to admit participants from the waiting room. If you have joined us, we ask that you update your name on Zoom to the name that you registered with. This way we can call on you and identify you for the question and answer session later in the workshop. Please note that we are recording tonight's workshop so that it can be viewed in the future on the ESD website. So by participating, you're granting us permission to have the name, voice, and likeness recorded. Everyone for now is placed on mute. Please note that we will walk all participants through participating through the phone and Zoom once the question and answer portion of our workshop starts. If you have any technical issues, please do email Sharon at carpstrategies.com and she will assist. All right. I know a few people are going to be still trickling in, but I think we should go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for your patience. Good evening. Welcome to Public Workshop number 3 for the Atlantic Yards Redevelopment Project. For those of you that attended one or both of our previous public workshops, or those that might have completed our online survey, thank you so much for your time and feedback. So we heard from many of you that you wanted more time to ask questions directly, so we have structured tonight's workshop accordingly. This virtual meeting will start with a brief introductory presentation from ESD and Atlantic Yards development team outlining concepts for the proposed redevelopment. Following that brief presentation, all the participants will have an opportunity to ask questions and share feedback during the Q&A session, which will be the majority of our evening tonight. If you haven't been introduced to me yet, my name is Annie White. I'm a principal at Carp Strategies. We're a community engagement firm, and we've been brought on by Empire State Development, or ESD, to moderate this public workshop. Uh, at this time, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping notes to make sure that everyone can participate. So this slide contains instructions for optimizing your viewing for those joining via computer. So please follow these instructions on the screen for both a PC or Mac computer. And I'll pause briefly to allow you to review. Go to the next slide, I think. Similarly, this slide is instructions for those viewing the workshop tonight via a phone. So please follow these instructions for either an Android or Apple device. And as a reminder, if you do have any technical issues, we have someone on standby. You can email Sharon at Carp Strategies, and our team will do our best to assist you. So like I said, the majority of the time will be spent with a Q&A session, but before we get into that, we're going to hear from Joel Kolkman from ESD and the development team outlining some early concepts for the proposed redevelopment at Atlantic Yards.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining tonight. My name is Joel Kolkman. I'm Senior Vice President of Real Estate Development and Planning at Empire State Development. As Annie mentioned, we have had a lot of participation in our first two public workshops, over 300, or nearly, I should say, 300 participants. And we've had so far more than 400 folks complete our online survey. So thank you all so much for your participation and feedback. Just a note on the survey, it is open until end of day tomorrow. So if you are looking to complete that, please do that soon. And, and just in general, this has been what we've found to be very helpful and thoughtful. We've received helpful and thoughtful feedback, and it's really invaluable for us as we put together our draft community engagement report and thinking through the actual redevelopment plan for the remaining portions of the Atlantic Yards project. So while for many of you, the project background is familiar by now, you've probably attended the first two meetings or you have been with the project since its inception. I'm going to go through a few slides quickly just to get everyone on the same page. So actually, if we just go back to that first slide, the previous slide. So Atlantic Yards project boundaries. So you see the map here. It's generally bounded by Atlantic Avenue to the north, Dean Street to the south, Vanderbilt Avenue to the east, Flatbush Avenue and 4th Avenues to the west. I'll go into more specifics later, but as the map shows, in addition to the Barclays Arena, there's 8 residential buildings that have been built to date. Those are shown in blue. And we're here tonight to discuss the future and undeveloped portions of the site. These are shown in the red dashed lines and include the platform sites along Atlantic Avenue and sites B1 and Site 5 on either side of Flatbush Avenue there. Next slide. So the Atlantic Yards project was originally approved by ESD in 2006 and has since been modified several times to continue to respond to ongoing ownership changes, development challenges, and neighborhood needs. Among ESD's approval of the plan includes overriding local zoning regulations and, in their place, establishing design guidelines that govern the project's site planning and massing. Currently, the approved plan calls for the Barclays Center and 16 residential and commercial towers with 6,430 residential units, of which 2,250 units would be affordable rental units. It also includes more than 8 acres of open space, 3 of which have been completed, community facilities including a local healthcare office and a public school, neighborhood infrastructure improvements, and transit upgrades, including the creation of the MTA entrance within the plaza at the Barclays Center, and improvements for Long Island Railroad operations completed at the track level of the platform sites. So our next slide. Here you can see what the currently approved site plan looks like. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to the Barclays Center, there are 8 buildings that have been completed, and this accounts for more than 3,000 residential units, and of which more than 1,300 are affordable. In addition, what has been completed to date, there are 6 buildings that are approved to be constructed on the platform sites along Atlantic Avenue. And to the west of the Barclays Center, as you see there on B1, an approximately 620-foot tall building is approved to be built on B1, be built on that site, and includes office, hotel, and residential uses. An approximately 250-foot tall building is approved to be built on Site 5 on the other side of Flatbush Avenue. The project's open space network is shown as kind of a network of interconnected open spaces between the buildings. While robust at 8 acres in size in total, what really is lacking here is that central open space. And again, if you've attended our previous sessions, you'll know that that's something that the development team is actively working to address. So before I hand it over to the development team, and by way of introduction, we have Cirrus and Elcor, a joint venture that we approved earlier this fall. And we have Joe McDonald from Cirrus and Anthony Tortora from Elcor, who will present next. But I'd like to take a step back to point out that this project has been in process for more than 20 years, from the initial approvals in 2006 and the planning and engagement completed before then, to the completion of the Barclays Center in 2012, the thousands of new residential units and hundreds of millions invested by the former developer in infrastructure and transit upgrades. So while we at ESD acknowledge the progress that has been made so far, which we believe is significant, we also know that there has been a number of challenges that this project has faced, and as a result, some commitments that have not been completed, and we know from many community members frustrations as a result of that. So we want to acknowledge that as well. But really, that is all why we are very excited to be at this point in the project, where we have a new development team that we approved last fall with Cirrus and Elcor, and really looking forward to having undertaken this community engagement process and continuing that process and continuing engaging with you all in the future to shape the remaining portions of this site. So with that, I will now turn it over to Joe McDonald from Cirrus and Anthony Tortora from Elcor.
Great. Thank you, Joel, for that intro. My name is Joseph McDonald. It's very nice to be here tonight. I'm a managing partner of Cirrus Workforce Housing. Cirrus Workforce Housing is a multifamily, affordable, and workforce housing investor and developer. We are backed by the pension funds of various labor unions from New York City who are reinvesting in the very communities that their members live in. We do so on a mission-driven basis, with the goal being to build housing across the income spectrum for the many New Yorkers that are experiencing significant rent burden today, potentially more than ever before. I'm joined by my partner in this project, Anthony Tortora from Elcor. I'm going to turn it over to him to let him introduce himself and his company. We're going to briefly recap some of the past slides that we've gone through at previous community sessions, and also talk about some of the things that we've heard. So, Anthony, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening. My name is Anthony Tortora. I'm a partner with Elcor. We are a New York City-based real estate investment manager and developer. We've been in business for 48 years, and we're backed by one of the largest public pension funds in the country. We specialize in urban residential development. As an organization, we've delivered over 30,000 residential apartments and over 6 million square feet of development in the greater New York area. We also have extensive experience with public-private partnerships involving complex infrastructure sites like this one. Next slide, please. On the screen is a site plan showing the existing conditions of the entire Atlantic Yards project plan area. For orientation, as Joel covered earlier, the plan is bordered by the Barclays Center and Site 5 to the west, Atlantic Avenue to the north, and Vanderbilt Avenue to the east. As you can see, the only sites left to develop are Site 5 and what we call the platform sites on blocks 1120 and 1121, or B5 through B10 as shown on the current slide. As we've mentioned in prior public workshops, one of Cirrus and Elcor's primary goals is to accelerate the delivery of housing at Atlantic Yards. But one of our key challenges is the cost and complexity associated with building over the tracks on the platform sites. Again, these sites noted as B5 through B10 on the current slide. To address this goal and the related challenge, we propose shifting more density to the solid ground located on Site 5 and B6, B7, where we can build faster and more cost effectively. Those areas are highlighted in blue on the current slide. By increasing the density on these sites and constructing buildings and the platform simultaneously, we will be able to deliver more housing sooner. Also, as we think about the delivery of the balance of the plan, it's important to remember that we're not starting from scratch. Our predecessor invested hundreds of millions of dollars and completed much of the foundation and infrastructure work needed to support the construction of the platform, as well as the balance of the buildings on the platform sites. Our job is to optimize the current plan to ensure that we are leveraging this prior investment to the greatest extent possible. Next slide, please. As we think about modifying the current plan, another key goal is to increase the amount of contiguous open space, as we discussed in our last public workshop. Shifting density to solid ground at the northern edge of B6 and B7 not only enables us to deliver more housing at Atlantic Yards sooner, it will also provide us with an opportunity to increase the amount of open space on the platform blocks and improve the connectivity of that open space, as you can see on the current slide. In addition, given that B8 is the most complex of the 6 platform sites due to several existing conditions at the track level, our idea is to eliminate a building on B8 altogether, reallocate that density to other sites, and deliver B8 as a public park amenity. Again, we need to hear your feedback before finalizing any specific program for the open space. But given B8's location at the center of the platform blocks, we believe this could be a transformative amenity that would provide over an acre of green space with better connectivity to adjacent sites and the broader community. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Joe to summarize the details of the initial plan that we presented at our prior workshops.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Anthony. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as some of you may recall from our first workshop, we presented one feasible conceptual alternative with respect to the development of Atlantic Yards. This is a conceptual plan and was informed by development principles, including affordability, open space, and responsible development, not simply to maximize the profit with respect to the overall development. The changes that would be needed with respect to a new approved plan, or the MGPP as it's referred to, in this conceptual plan, would allow us to efficiently create housing across the income spectrum. We would be moving density around the site so it could be delivered as quickly as possible, a very consistent theme we've heard amongst our various conversations with community members. And finally, we're thinking about and thought about with this conceptual plan different ways in which the site could deliver significant community benefits as were originally intended. These would include, as was mentioned before, a central green space, indoor and outdoor community designated spaces, including an intergenerational center, layouts which are conducive to small pedestrian-driven local retail to support local businesses, and ultimately making sure that all these community benefits are positioned to be enjoyed not only by the residents of these new buildings, but by community members as a whole. In order to make room for these goals, this conceptual plan proposes increasing total density with respect to Atlantic Yards, approximately 20% to 9.6 million square feet. The original approved density, or bulk, was approximately 8 million feet, which includes Barclays Center, which is between 800 and 900,000 feet, I believe. Importantly, the density increase that we're proposing is focused on the creation of rental housing across the income spectrum, rather than the significant commercial and condominium components that were originally planned when Atlantic Yards was put together some time ago. This brings total units to approximately 9,000, and depending on final massings of the buildings, would bring average heights on the platform blocks, 1120 and 1121, to approximately 500 feet. Similarly, on Site 5, this design refocuses on rental housing from the heavily residential condo-driven designs that were proposed by some previous developers. It's designed to keep total height below 800 feet in contrast to some other buildings that were recently built on Flatbush Avenue. Next slide, please. Since the concept on the prior slide was put forward, we've successfully elicited conversation with many community members. And there have been various pieces of feedback, some which have been highly consistent. If you look at density in units, what we've heard, and we've heard this very consistently, and frankly, we agree with it, is a need for the future development of Atlantic Yards to focus on family-sized units, 2 and 3 bedrooms. We think that makes sense with respect to serving the community. We also think it makes sense with respect to the feasibility of a project such as this. In terms of affordability, we want to clarify, and we've heard this fairly consistently, that the original proposal or original presentation with respect to a feasible proposal was suggesting capping AMIs at 130% while providing affordable housing across the income spectrum, including low incomes. Another consistent piece of feedback that we've heard as we've spoken with the community is the need to talk about AMI in terms of rent, job titles, and what does it actually mean. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so what does that mean? On this slide, we've laid out various potential units that could be planned in a development such as Atlantic Yards. And we think a development such as Atlantic Yards should have room for all of these types of units. The first row shows a very low income unit at approximately 40% of AMI, which could consist of a restaurant worker with a child making approximately $50,000 a year. In this case, a 2-bed renting for just under $1,500 a month. Going to the next row, we have a low income unit example. And this may fit a construction laborer making approximately $70,000 a year, living alone in a studio in a newly built project for approximately $1,700 a month. Above that, we have moderate income and middle income examples, including a paralegal and a social worker making approximately $60,000 to $70,000 each and sharing a 1-bedroom at approximately $3,000 a month. And finally, a middle income example of a 3-bed, which may be a family composed of a teacher and a nurse who've been on the job for quite a while, make in total $200,000 a year, and also have 2 children within a 3-bed at approximately $5,500 per month. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so what we've heard today is helping us to continue to modulate the variables across the top of the screen. These variables are not all the variables in a complex development like Atlantic Yards, but these are the variables that we've heard quite clearly are important to the community and that do drive much of what will be built here. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're now at a point where we together can rethink about and have an opportunity to try to bring the sort of priorities under which we weight these variables to the forefront on a project that was planned a very long time ago in a New York that was very different from today. The constraints that we operate in, and this is not Cirrus or LCOR specific, it has to do with the types of conditions which are typical on these types of sites where they're transportation oriented, and that's great because it's next to transportation. I think most people agree on that. But we're dealing with atypical site conditions. We're actually building over live rail for much of the site. And the tariffs and increased costs that not only this, but other projects like it in and around New York City and other major cities are dealing with today. We're trying to work within the variables at the top of the screen, being very sober and very realistic within the constraints of a project like this so that it can ultimately be delivered. One thing we've consistently heard is a need to deliver it with pace in a reliable way to ultimately provide 1,000+ affordable units with AMIs across the income spectrum. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joel Kochman from ESD.
All right. Well, thank you. So we're right there at the Q&A portion of the evening. So thanks for listening to our presentation update. Before we do that, just a quick look ahead of what we have to come. So again, I know I mentioned earlier, the online survey is up until tomorrow. So again, if you want to provide that input and feedback for us, please do that by tomorrow. And note that a lot of the questions are very reflective of the topics we covered, and really even some of the direct questions we asked in workshops 1 and 2. So especially if you missed those previous sessions, a great opportunity to provide your input on those topics. And that will be used as part of the feedback for the process. We have after this workshop, we'll have a 4th workshop where that will also be held virtually. And during that workshop, we'll present the first draft of the community engagement report and update you all on early thinking on a proposed project plan for the site. And we don't have that exact date yet, but you should just keep on checking on our website for project updates and updates on that meeting. And of course, we'll be doing a lot of different outreach, as we always have done, to make sure that once we have a date for that meeting, folks are aware of it and can join. So, and I just want to note that after Public Workshop 4, then we'll take some feedback that we hear from that meeting, issue our final report, and that will wrap up this phase of our engagement. But this is just the first phase, just the initial phase. And want to note that we will continue to welcome public feedback in the months and years following this process. And we will continue to bring the proposed plan to the community and through subsequent and through other forums as we advance our approval process. These required public hearings as part of the environmental review and modification process that will follow this. So, combination of our own approval process and touch points there, with really ongoing communication and feedback loops with community stakeholders throughout. Just to note that this is not the end of our engagement with you all on this project. So I think now I turn it back over to Annie to start kicking off the Q&A portion.
Yes, thanks, Joel. Let's get into the question and answer portion of the workshop. Next slide, please. So tonight's Q&A, we will alternate between spoken, so that's everyone raising their hand and asking a question, and then written questions. The written questions will include both those submitted in real time through the Q&A function on Zoom. I'm already seeing a few of those come in, which is great, as well as the questions that were submitted ahead of time leading up to tonight's event that you were prompted to submit via Zoom. So I'll go over how to go to submit these questions in just a moment. Please note, depending on how many questions that we get, due to our time constraints, we might not be able to get to all questions submitted. We'll do our best to ask the questions that we're getting asked the most across all these platforms. So due to that, you might notice a slight rewording of questions or consolidating multiple questions into one, just to try to cover as many individual questions as we can. Please also be mindful of the community guidelines to have a productive conversation that we're going to drop into the chat as well. So on this slide, you'll find instructions for those that wish to ask a question verbally using the raise hand function in Zoom. So at the start of each spoken question section, I will announce the next 3 speakers based on the queue of raised hands, and we'll ask each of you to prepare to speak. Speakers will be identified by your name or the last 3 digits of the phone number if you're dialing in. So please try to listen carefully for your name or number. And then when your name is called by me, you will have the ability to unmute yourself and ask your question. So we're giving each speaker up to 2 minutes to ask their question, but do try to keep it as brief as possible so that we can get through as many questions as possible. When 2 minutes have passed, you'll be invited to send any remaining thoughts or questions to ESD via an email address, or submit additional comments and thoughts via our online survey. Once you've spoken, we'll go ahead and lower your hand for you, so you don't need to worry about that. And please do follow the instructions on the screen for either your Android or Apple device. All right. And then if you would like to submit a written question that I would then read out loud to the presenters, you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. You probably have to click down on that more to see it. It's not right on the bottom. So you can follow these instructions to see that Q&A feature, and there's additional instructions if you're joining by phone. Also, if you submitted a question ahead of time through that Zoom portal, we have those and we'll be inserting those into the Q&A session. Okay. With that, if our ESD team and developer team is ready, I think we can go ahead and get started. We're going to begin with verbal questions, or those people raising their hands. So I'm going to give my team just a minute to get that queue up and running. If you would like to ask a question of the team, please do raise your hand now. Just a minute so we can get. Okay. And apologize, I'm going to do my best with with names tonight, but our first three speakers are going to be Natalie Leonard, Raul Rothblatt, and Assemblymember Joanne Simon. Those are the first three, but we're going to start with Natalie Leonard.
Hi. Thanks for doing this. So my question is, just for context, I'm a renter. I live in this area, and I live with four roommates, and we're all kind of rent burdened. And so I have kind of two questions. The first is, um, I love the idea of increasing the amount of units that are available. We desperately need housing, and this is already a pretty dense area. So my first question is, what's the kind of physical capacity limit for this building space? In other words, if you were building as many units as was possible within the laws of physics, how many could you get, and why are we not pushing for that many, given the percentage of this area that's rent burdened? Um, well, I'll just leave that as my one question and hear your answer. Thanks.
Sure. So, the proposal that the developer's putting forward does call for a lot more housing. And I think, to your answer there, I'm sure can be more than we're putting forward. However, there's environmental impacts, and, there's housing units are the more the better in some instances, but there really are trade-offs and things need to be studied. So once we actually have the final plan that we will be putting forward to modify our approvals, that all has to be analyzed through the environmental review process, things like air quality and noise and traffic and shadows and open space impacts. So, we think this is a really good balance of adding so much more housing than has even already contemplated for this site, with what some of those trade-offs may be. And we really don't even know what the impacts of them are yet, because we actually need to study them. So we'll be really looking forward to getting into that work later this year.
Great. The next question asker will be Raul Rothblatt.
Hi, thank you for coming to our community. I would love to invite you to spend more time to talk with us. I just have to say, the median Brooklyn income, I did a quick check, I looked like about 47,000, and you're saying very low income is about 52,000. So you're saying that the median Brooklyn resident will not really be able to live in these apartments, and you're basically calling half of New York poor by doing this. I mean, I hope you can adjust those numbers and that language a lot, because $52,000 is not very low income, and I also would love to have much more details on the other bands of income, because I think even a lot of your constituents, when they think of affordable housing, they're thinking of, I mean, the union workers that I've met at some of the previous meetings, they were thinking of 70,000 as like median income. And I would love to get much more specifics on that. I hope the own workers that you are part of your coalition here will be able to afford this. And I would strongly suggest that you lower the affordable numbers way down and also include senior housing and other things. We have a lot of housing for people earning $130,000 a year, $100,000 a year. And the fact that this housing is really not going to be even affordable for those guys that much. I mean, this is the rents for people that earning that level of income are these are apartment units that are going to be subsidized, and the rents are going to be pretty close to market rate or even above market rate. So I would love to get much more focus on lower income. Thank you.
Sure. Joe or Anthony, if there's anything you want to directly respond to, turn over to you.
Sure. Anthony, do you want me to take this? Or do you want to take it?
Sure. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, I'll take it. So one, I actually agree with much of what you said. The way or the way that we described folks who have different incomes was based on the way that those bands are typically described in housing policy, both in New York City and on a national basis. Cirrus develops in order to ensure a couple of the things that you mentioned, and that is that there are incomes across the spectrum. What's happened in the city, actually over a very long period of time, slowly, but I think is being felt more acutely today because rents have gone up very quickly, is that folks who are experiencing rent burden have shifted from the sort of bottom or lower income part of the income band all the way up to professions that were traditionally thought of as middle income or workforce in a very significant way. And there's lots of kind of external research which goes through all that. In terms of what we want to do here, it's finding a balance so that we can offer housing for folks across the income spectrum. That slide was not intended to be sort of exclusive, right? That this is it. It was to demonstrate different types of professions and different types of folks that we hope can ultimately live in the project when it's done. But thank you for your question and comment.
And the next speaker will be Assemblymember Joanne Simon.
Thank you. Thank you for having this additional session, and I appreciate the effort that's gone in to this. A couple of things I wanted to just request and ask other additional speakers if they share these concerns. But I think that, as I've said before, I would like to encourage more in-person engagement on this. I know last time when we all met in different groups, there wasn't a reporting back function, so we don't know what the other tables discussed. And I think that kind of feedback is helpful to people because they learn from that feedback and from other people's ideas. So I want to encourage us to do more of that going forward. I also want to strongly encourage that to sort of put a pin in Raul's comment about the units of affordable housing and at the levels at which those affordable housing units were agreed to in the original affordable housing MOU, which is greater than what you've shown here. So I think that the number of units that are affordable and truly affordable for people who are, the median income in Brooklyn, which is not the median income or the AMI set by HUD, but to deal with the AMI in Brooklyn, it would be something we would need. I appreciate the talking about the larger units for families. That's, I think, critically important. And so I'm glad to hear about that. I also want to encourage that there is an ongoing iterative process with community. You have this session done, and then you're going to be doing some other work. But I think that this issue about developing the idea for, let's say, the open space, right? We can get fancy designers in it, but I think it's a great idea if we have participatory design, which I know our Parks Department has done many times and is very effective at. And this way we can have responses from people about the way they would use this space, given its location and given the constraints about it. And also, I have a question about the time horizon. What you're proposing to do is obviously very ambitious. Even though there's been a lot of work sunk into the rail yards, it is also still a very lengthy building process. When would you have the first units on deck? How long will it take for you to build this out? And how will you build in, through this process and an eventual MGPP, adjustments to that don't require, let's say, a whole new process, but includes community in those changes that might be happening going forward?
Joe, do you want to answer
I
kind
have
of
a
the
lot of
first?
questions there, didn't I?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate them all. I was like, Joe, do you want to answer the first portion? I think I can talk about process and GPP stuff.
Sure. Thank you for the comments. I think we've said this fairly consistently. We saw the opportunity to enter this project and to actually leverage two very significant things that Greenland had put into it. One was time. So it took a long time for them to rebuild the LIRR yard. And two was the significant foundation systems that were put into the platform. And we've attempted to redesign the layout of the project in a way that will allow us to deliver affordable housing more quickly. In fact, one of our goals is that the sort of first buildings out of the ground, which we've shared previously, we think may make sense to be B6 or B7, with Site 5, a portion of that also providing much needed affordable housing to bring forward the timeline. With respect to how Cirrus and LCOR view development within the core principles that we've previously shared, we're looking to balance these variables within a feasible project. What does that mean? One way to make a project more feasible and to make more room for housing is to lessen the total cost of the project. And we started that process by stepping in and carefully evaluating how we could leverage the previous investments of Greenland, which we've shared publicly, are nearly $1 billion and much time. The other reality of projects like this, and this is different from the Atlantic Avenue rezoning, this is different from other rezonings, in that the site conditions are atypical. They're relatively expensive to build. The good thing is that when you look at delivery of housing here, we believe 1120 can be delivered relatively quickly because those foundations are in the ground. The ultimate timing and ultimate delivery of housing will actually have a lot to do with the staging of the platforms and how they're built. In order to deliver the most housing quickly, we would need to be building the platforms in short succession. There are positives to that. In general, projects like this, the quicker you're building, so you should take the right time to plan it, but the quicker you build, the more predictable it is.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you would have a significant amount of construction going on in a relatively small place all at once. So there's other negative knock-on effects of that. So there's variables that need to be balanced. Our goal is to deliver affordable and workforce housing at the front of the line, not through the project, not at the back of the line, as others have attempted in the past. To do it in a way which is cost effective, which will ultimately allow the sort of deepest and highest levels of affordability. And to your point, to do that within a design that is hopefully community building, and that takes into account the community's concerns and needs, which we've heard many. Many of them are very consistent, but we continue to listen. So hopefully that answered most. Joel, I'm sure you have other things to add.
Yeah, I just want to talk a bit about process, and as a member, thank you again for all these questions. I had mentioned it in my remarks earlier, but we at ESD, and I know some of you're familiar with this, but for everyone else, our general project plan approvals allow us to do things like override zoning and enter into certain transactions with development partners. And in overriding zoning, we establish design guidelines. So I think through ongoing engagement on the site plan and the massing and the design and the open space and all these really critical components, we'll be able to build in that kind of feedback into our design guidelines. And we have, over the years, I would say, at least in my time, have gotten more and more advanced in what and kind of detailed in what we put in those design guidelines for projects. And so that's certainly something we can and intend to do here. And then obviously we have that all goes through a public process traveling along with the environmental review approvals. So I think we have opportunities to really put what folks are providing or saying to us as it relates to design into the approvals, into the design guidelines, and also with some respect creating enough flexibility so not every little tweak needs to kind of come back to kind of a change and a modification, and so that's a balance that we'll certainly have to deal with.
Well, I'd like to encourage some engagement around those design guidelines as well, because they obviously need to be updated. And I think, you're quite right to do that. But I'd want to encourage more engagement around those design guidelines, because that really matters to people
Mm-hmm.
a great deal, especially in this.
Absolutely. No, thank
you
you for the comment.
Great. So we are going to come back to the verbal questions, but we're going to pivot over to some written questions now. So if you have your hand up, please keep it up and we will get back to you. So I'll be reading out these questions that have been submitted for the team here. So the first question is, how will ESD enforce affordability levels through its contract with the development team?
Yeah, so this project has multiple agreements, I would say, with kind of with the development team here, and those are affordability is certainly something. When we modify these agreements to reflect this new phase of the project, we can do that and have real requirements and milestones are outlined in those documents. I'd also say that affordable units are typically under regulatory agreements with either the city or the state housing agency, depending on the programs that are used, which is just another level of enforcement and compliance for affordable units.
Great. Next question is, much of the built affordable housing has been delivered according to the highest possible AMIs allowed, with few units available to the lower income households. Will more affordable units be built at lower AMI levels this next phase?
I'll hand that one over to Joe and Anthony.
Sure. So when you look at the original entitlements and agreements, as well as certain of the state and city programs, such as tax abatements, that were in place at the time they were negotiated, there were certainly higher AMIs. I think that to date, certain units have even been developed up to 160% of AMI. What we originally proposed, or what was in the feasible proposal that we put forth, were units up to 130% of AMI, with units built across the spectrum down to lower AMIs. And so again, we're looking to kind of modulate the variables here to a feasible proposal. And it is fairly expensive to build this site. But we would intend to deliver average AMIs as well as a mix of AMIs that are lower than what was delivered previously.
Right. So with the 9,000 additional residential units, where is the new school placed within the plan?
Let's turn this one over to Joe and Anthony as well.
Sure, that's a great question. So the original plan called for, I believe, roughly 6,400 units, and a school was already built. Since that time, the background conditions with respect to schools in Brooklyn have changed. If you look at, for example, the Atlantic Avenue rezoning that was done directly adjacent to this site, that added approximately 5,000 units, and I believe found that schools were adequate. It has to do with the total number of units as well as the unit type. So as you add more family-sized units, you tend to have more children, which use more seats in the schools. This is something that will be studied further. It's not something that we can kind of definitively answer today because the background conditions have changed from the previous EIS, the previous environmental review. But it is something that will be studied, and to the extent that additional school seats are needed, they would be integrated into the plan. Thank you for the question.
And we're going to switch back to the verbal questions. So the next three speakers will be Michael Picarillo, Chanda Bishop, and Ethel Tias. Please prepare to ask your question, but we're going to start with Michael Picarillo.
Good evening, everyone. How's everybody going? My name is Michael Picarillo from the New York City District Council of Carpenters. My question is, I know that ESD is responsible for the process and the board has to approve any changes. What's left to be done and what's kind of the timeline of when the projects are going to get started?
All right, so I'll start with just kind of the timeline. We have what's left to be done is the two platform sites and the proposal on site 5 and B1. So site 5 currently is where like Modell's and PC Richards is located. So it's a lot of units that still is on the table with, as Joe and Anthony laid out. We have upwards, I believe, 5,000 units that could be built with these remaining portions of the site. And the process. So we go through our modification of this general project plan. This is the technical document that has the kind of the approved project, like I said, override zoning, outlines the project, allows us to enter into these transaction documents. It also follows an environmental review process. That will take about a year and a half from when we really start that process in earnest. So if we're starting that process later this year, we would really not be beginning construction, let's say, until best case end of 2027, or more likely kind of in the first half or so of 2028. But call it 2027, 2028 to begin construction. And this is platform construction, and there's some terra firma sites, so the phasing is still something we'll be working with Cirrus Nalcor on. Okay.
So there's no way to kind of speed that up, right? Because I mean, we're in an affordability crisis, and and also too, right? I'm speaking from two different sides. My union did invest in Cirrus, right? So we're looking for a return on our investment, and also too, right? Housing is scarce, and I'm a carpenter, right? Carpenters union, we're looking to put people to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We would love for these processes to go faster. I mean, it really what drives it primarily is the environmental review process. And, if you've ever looked at an environmental impact statement, these are documents that are thousands of pages. A lot of really detailed analysis goes into that. And there are really critical milestones and public hearings and points throughout that process. And the governor recently, in her State of the State, announced efforts that she wants to put forward to streamline some of these processes. But for a project like this that is so large and will require that really thorough analysis, a year and a half for that work is a realistic timeline, and aligns with a lot of other projects that we see in the city.
Great, thank you. The next speaker will be Shonda Bishop. Oh, it looks like Shonda went back on.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you. The existing community there, how many units are there today? And I know we're going to, the plan is to now up it to an additional 9,000, which is to me a very large amount of units. How, I guess, I'm looking at crime is going to increase. Just, we got a bigger population here. Is the police presence going to, is that going to be taken into the account? Like, I know the 78th precinct is in that area. That's a small precinct. Is it planned to build another police station or a larger police station to manage this, to meet overpopulated area?
Mm-hmm. I think in general, when projects come online, there's coordination with the local precinct, of course, and I think this would be no different. And so as we work forward, and really as Cirrus and LCOR move forward on the project, that will certainly be discussing and coordinating with the local precinct.
The next speaker is Ethel Tias.
Thank you for allowing me to ask my questions. I actually have two questions. Because of the delays in the project, how will prior failure to perform penalties be addressed? That's question one. Question two is how will tonight's presentation materials be available to be printed tonight? Thank you.
I'll answer your second question first. And yeah, we'll have the presentation itself, this whole Zoom will be posted on ESD's website. And we've been posting materials on our website as well. So on the Atlantic Yards project page. So you should be able to find information there. Your first question, I believe you're referring to the liquidated damages for the affordable housing shortfall. We have worked with the development team to secure $12 million towards that liquidated damages number. Now, just for full transparency, that number accumulates to currently about I used to know the number off the top of my head, $1.7-ish million a month. So $12 million, accrues quite quickly over the course of, at that rate, I should say. However, we have worked with them to secure that money. That money is going to the New York City Affordable Housing Trust Fund to be invested in affordable housing projects that are located within Community Boards 2, 3, 6, and 8. So that to us is part of a win here. We also want to be mindful that there are a lot of costs with this project and a lot of challenges, and Joe laid them out. There's the infrastructure and platform costs. There's the rising costs of construction and uncertainty with tariffs. There's just a more challenging financing market in general. And so we know that public resources are going to be needed for this project. We don't know how much currently, but what we do know is that we want to keep this project moving and doing our best to minimize costs that are added to the project, so we can make sure that this is a successful, impactful project with really a large amount of housing and a large amount of affordable housing, which we know is sorely needed here.
Okay. We will go back to some written questions. The first of which is, what other large real estate projects in New York City have a density comparable to what's being proposed here, which is about 409 apartments per acre?
All right, let's kick that over to Joe and Anthony.
Hey, Joe, I'll jump in here unless you want to take it.
No, go for it. Thanks, Anthony.
Great question. One of our key design principles as we think about our proposed plan is to ensure our proposed plan is contextual to surrounding area. And as we could all acknowledge, the backdrop of this area in Brooklyn has changed dramatically since this project was conceived in the early 2000s. Our proposed density is consistent with the Atlantic Avenue portion of AIM Up. It's less than downtown Brooklyn, just as of note, and there are other examples of this type of density in other neighborhoods like Hunters Point, Jamaica, and Long Island City, just to name a few.
Great. Next question. What will happen to the promised urban room amenity at the site at B1? How do we know that the commitments for community spaces will be respected?
Another one for Joe and Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again goes back to our kind of core design principles is delivering a variety of community uses, and we're looking forward to getting the feedback from the community from our last workshop, the first workshop about various community facilities that would be helpful to the community. So, that's something that we're going to be working through, and the goal is to be responsive to the community's needs with a variety of different type of community uses. Joe, anything to add on that?
Not for mine.
Next question. The only constant on this project for the last 20 years has been ESD. How do you plan on completing this project built the right way quickly so that the people can get the housing they need?
All right, well, I'll take that one. So, we really view this as a new chapter for the project. We've been with the development. The prior developer was Greenland USA, and they did a lot. I don't want to diminish what they did do, but they also didn't do a lot. And we're excited to be here with Cirrus and Elcor, and excited to again be in a position to have this community engagement and get your feedback and start shaping what the rest of the site looks like. And we like you are eager to get this moving. So we want to keep on having conversations with you all. We want to keep on hearing what you think should be here. And we want to also keep on discussing how we can at ASD and really the project team overall, really prioritize accountability and transparency along the way.
Thanks, Joel. All right, we'll go back to our participants for verbal questions. The next three will be Ray Levy, Alan Rossner, and Elliot Hoffman. And we will start with Ray Levy.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. This is Ray. I'm a renter in Brooklyn, and I have two questions. One, you alluded to at points in the presentation. The question is around ratios of studios to 1 bedrooms to 2 bedrooms to family size units, and what the thought process is, like how you are determining those ratios are appropriate for the area, for the intended tenants. And then my second question is, how do you think this project will shift under the Mamdani administration? And do you think there's any leverage there? He's a mayor that has been promising an affordability agenda, lots of housing and things like that. I'm wondering if there's any connection between Empire State Development and the Mamdani administration in terms of this project.
Okay, I'm going to answer the second part of your question first, and then I'll kick it to Joe and Anthony for the first part. This is a state project, but that does not preclude, city involvement. Actually, there are several buildings that have been constructed that have, deep levels of affordability. The building, 461 Dean is an example. The one on Carlton, I'm blanking on the exact address, but another 100% affordable building. But they all had received funding for through the city's Department of Housing Preservation and Development to get those deep levels of affordability there. And that was a partnership and a discussion that was held at the time with the state and the city and the then development team. So we certainly, look forward to engaging with the new administration, and we do so on a lot of our work. So, this wouldn't be unique in that sense. But nothing, we're 3 weeks in, so nothing super definitive on that, obviously, at this point. But on the unit mix, Joe and Anthony.
Sure, I'm happy to take that one. So when we plan unit mix, or when developers typically plan unit mix, you're really looking at a few different aspects of the project. So one, you're looking at the underlying composition of the community. There are actually certain portions of New York City which have less multi-person households than others, right? You're then also looking at what is the current composition of units within the underlying community market surrounding area, and what is needed. When you look at what's occurred in New York City for the last 5 to 10 years, many developers have built projects which are very heavily skewed to studios and ones. That may be appropriate for certain areas. That doesn't really make sense. We don't believe it makes sense in an area like this. And ultimately, we think kind of providing units under which there's deep demand in the community, meaning a significant number of people versus the units of that type available, it's not just the right thing to do, it makes good business sense. I would also anticipate in a project like this, we'll be doing many iterations of this over time, and the percentage of units will actually vary by type of building. So a bunch of different things that go into it, but thank you for the question.
Next speaker will be Alan Rossner.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I've been concerned this project has been going on for a really long time, and it's adding increased density. It's going to be an enormous use of energy, and there's no addressing any issue of climate change on this project. And I would like to know, since in the second session, I asked about whether or not there could be a feasibility study for wide area networked geothermal. And this is just asking for a feasibility study. And it would seem to me that this is eminently worth doing. There are benefits not just to the developer, but for the community. And it could possibly include the MTA. That would be a bit of a stretch, but they're all there, very big energy users. If the geology is right, maybe even electrical energy could be generated. Is there any interest in looking at this aspect of what's now available and is the only green energy that is still supported by federal funding?
Well, thanks for the question. I'm going to turn that over to Anthony and Joe.
Thanks, Joel. Joe, I'll jump in here.
Yes,
okay.
thanks.
Well, thanks for your question. Great question. We are exploring a variety of sustainability practices in line with our policies. Some of the things we look at, resilience, wellness objectives, while reducing embedded carbon, optimizing energy and water efficiency just are a few things that we'll be looking at consistent with our sustainability practices. It's also worth mentioning that, we are one of the largest geothermal developers in the city. We've delivered at one point was the largest active heating and cooling geothermal system. So it's definitely something we'll be looking into as part of the next phase of the design. But very much appreciate your question.
And the next speaker will be Elliot Hoffman.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Elliot. I'm also a renter in Brooklyn, and I would add, I guess, rent burden as well. And just want to bring it back to the topic of affordability. Like, obviously, that's one of the biggest issues that New York City is facing. We've all talked about this already, and understandably, you've mentioned constraints like tariffs and extra expenses that are necessary for building on the rail yard. But I just want to go back to that past the missed penalties by Greenland, like the past developer that failed their obligations. And Joel, you did a good job at mentioning like what has happened. Like you've collected, I guess you said 12 million, which I understand is just a small fraction of probably the billions of dollars that they owe based on the math that you had laid out. So Joel, rather than just answering what happened with why only a fraction of penalties have been collected, can you help us understand why ESD is not collecting the rest, especially if it could be used to offset the project costs here and increase affordability?
Well, I mean, it goes back to, again, adding costs, right? So if we collect those, there are just, that adds cost to the project. And again, there's already going to be a subsidy need. Again, we have a platform to construct and other extraordinary costs here. So we want to minimize the costs of, that aren't outside of our control. So in turn, we can actually try to maximize affordability at the site. Collecting those fees would ultimately come out of the developer's project budget, right? That would be part of the budget and the financing that they'd have to put together. So it would really complicate that from a cost perspective and require more subsidy. And I hear you. $12 million is not a lot when you see what that monthly rate is, let's call it. But it was something that ESD demanded, that there be a meaningful payment that goes to that fund, and we look forward to seeing those funds used by the city.
Okay. I'm going to switch to some written questions. Will the future phases of the project exacerbate the continuing displacement of people of color from the neighborhood?
This is something that's studied as part of the environmental review. There's a socioeconomic chapter, economic disparity studies, and there's a lot of data and analysis that will be put forward in looking at that. I think also a big priority here is affordable housing and working with folks to create as much affordable housing at a range of incomes, serving the lowest earning New Yorkers to people who are earning what at least the labels are moderate or middle income. So I think the significant investment in affordable housing here is something that we're all focused on, and obviously is a really important tool to mitigate that displacement.
Okay, I'm going to combine two kind of similar themed questions here. So can you share how many floors per building are being constructed, and what is the average height of the building? Is it 500 feet or 550 feet?
All right, Joe, take it away.
Sure. So average heights of the building, I believe you're referring to the sites on the platform sites, 1120 and 1121 would be approximately 550 feet. In terms of total floors, that would vary again between building and also between the platform sites, 1120 and 1121 in site 5. Buildings would vary approximately between 40 and 80 floors.
Next question. What does ESD plan to do differently to improve accountability and transparency so mistakes of the past that have led to delays and the public benefits aren't repeated again?
Yeah, I will take that one. And I think we kind of answered a similar question earlier here. So, it really has to go to the project documents. We can outline ideas and mechanisms for creating accountability and transparency. And I do think, though, that that's something that we want to continue discussing with folks, and getting ideas, and to make sure that we're doing, that we increase that and that we make folks feel that we're doing better than has been done before. So more conversations, and we look forward to more discussion on that.
Next question. The proposed AMI levels were not very useful. How many units could you build instead at the critical deep levels of 40 to 60% AMI?
Joe and Anthony, can you take this one?
Sure, I'm happy to take it. So when you actually look at New York City today, folks are experiencing rent burden at slightly higher AMIs. That's not to sort of belittle or to downplay the significant rent burden that has and continues to be experienced at more deeply affordable AMIs. When you look at a project like Atlantic Yards, if you want to optimize, you want to offer the largest number of affordable units at the lowest AMI possible, you can really do this in a few different ways. You can lower the cost of the project. We've actually started that. So by stepping in, purchasing Greenland's debt, for anybody who doesn't know on the call, that's the previous developer, who had invested over $1 billion, we've started to lower the forward cost of the project, which allows us to achieve lower overall AMIs within a feasible construct. You can also bring more public resources to offset the total cost of the project, right? And so what we're trying to do, and this is something that on these large sites is not easy to do. There's a push and pull in these things. They're, all kind of connected, the various variables, is to find the right mix of AMIs while the project is also feasible. If you look at other kind of adjacent rezonings, AIM Up or Atlantic Avenue rezoning, which is sort of directly adjacent, I believe they were at 25 at 60 on most of the sites. They did have some offsite affordable on state-owned land. And to contextualize, those were sites that did not have, extraordinary conditions such as Atlantic Yards. But thank you for the question.
Next question is a quick one. Can you share the link to the survey? I believe that answer is yes. We have a slide at the end, but we'll also drop it in the chat or drop the project website URL in the chat, which also has a link to the survey. Okay. I'm gonna go back. It looks like Elliot Hoffman, we'll go back to you as there's no other hands raised. Elliot?
Thank you. Yeah. I just wanted to go back to, I guess, my original question with Joel, just to make sure that as a community we have like understanding of the options available. And Joel, you mentioned that the reason that ESD has not gone to pursue the full amount owed by Greenland USA for their failure in the last project was because, is it true that you're saying the cost of going after owed money that's contractually obliged is more expensive than the amount that you would gain in return?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's not about the cost of going after them per se. Or going after the money. It's that the risk of going after that money, and Greenland could make claims that we didn't necessarily have right to go after that money, and that back and forth, which would be a legal back and forth, could cause significant delays and potentially years-long delays in delivering this project. That's something we felt, we thought that risk is not worth that. And that's why we worked with this development team to try to secure, to actually secure funds that can go directly into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
So next speaker will be Sean Hart.
Yeah, hi. I wrote this question in as well, so that doesn't need read again, I suppose. I wanted to follow up on a question that was asked at the beginning of the presentation, which was about exploring proposals that would have like radically more housing units. I think the recurring message again and again has just been like tonight that people want to see deeper levels of affordability. They want to see more affordable units. Um, a metric that was mentioned by Joseph while he was giving the initial presentation was that like it seemed to be a benefit that was proposed that height would not exceed a certain threshold. Um, I'm not really like, is that like a key metric that's being optimized for? And if so, why? I mean, there's a lot of tall buildings near this site and it's right by the Atlantic Avenue terminal. So I don't know. I guess it seems like why would we want to optimize against density past a certain point?
Yeah, I think Joe, this could go to you.
Sure. So thank you for the question. Um, we've all or we've inherited a site in some ways from Greenland, which is halfway built. And there's kind of good things with that. And that is if you go, and probably many people on the phone call have walked past 1120 and 1121 and seen the various foundations in the ground. The foundations in the ground took a number of years and hundreds of millions of dollars, and are designed to support buildings up to a certain height. Now, we're confident that those foundations can support buildings of the heights that we've proposed, the roughly 550-foot average that was referenced earlier. To the extent that we actually wanted to build taller, we would have to contend with two issues. One, we would actually have to undo a lot of the work that was already done by Greenland, which would be heavily costly. It would also take a very long time. If you're from the community, you probably saw how long the rail yard actually took to construct. And that's because you would likely have to put additional supports in the ground, caissons and other things that would disturb both the operations and the layouts of the MTA's tracks. Beyond that, and I think sometimes people can underappreciate this, the taller you build buildings, expenses actually tend to increase almost exponentially. So if you just look at the cost per unit of a building in a place like New York City that is 8 stories, the cost per unit of a 40-story building tends to be higher. You have more concrete, more steel, more time, more cranes. If you go above that, right, it gets more expensive again at 60, 70, 80 stories, where you start to deal with things like wind days, right? It just takes a lot longer to construct, so it's going to take you longer to build the building. And it's also going to make the building more expensive on average. And so one of the things we have to balance in New York, we have a housing problem. We also have a land problem, right? We need to find land which is well located near transportation that people want to live. That's really what we're doing here. The platforms are creating land that buildings can be built on. And one of the jobs, and I'm very happy to be joined by Elcor on this, that we spend a lot of our time thinking about is how do we thoughtfully increase total housing available here, both affordable and market rate housing, within the constraints of what we've been left. Beyond that, I think we have to acknowledge that as buildings get taller and density or bulk increases in a tight area like Brooklyn, like this, there would be further environmental impacts, which could be things like the schools. So there's actually a natural limit to these sites. But it's a very good question and something we think about all the time, sort of the push and pull between building density and bulk, ultimately what that does to the community. And in this case, where we're actually inheriting some very good things, the foundations in the ground, how do we utilize those to the greatest extent possible? Kind of going back to the original question, which is how do we kind of construct this in the most efficient manner such that there can be more community benefits and affordability? But hopefully that's clear, and thank you for the question.
And the next speaker will be Raul Rothblatt.
Hi, thanks for taking my question again. At the last session, we were dealing with the space around the buildings, and there was no consideration of loading into the buildings. And I asked the staff on that day about what looked like it was going to create lots of blockage along Atlantic Avenue as people were coming into and going out of the buildings. There didn't seem to be any consideration of the some of the other buildings away from Atlantic Avenue, how people would bring things into and out of the buildings. And I was disappointed with the answers then. And do you have any updated answers? Because it seems as if there was zero thought given into that. And I would love to see some further specific details about that. Thank you.
Joe and Anthony?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So first off, that's a great observation and a great question. Loading and back of house spaces and how these buildings are serviced are certainly going to be a key focus of ours as we progress into the next stage of design. The integration of those spaces with streetscape, public realm, and first floor spaces will also be a key component of that. So that's something we're definitely focused on. We know how to do this, and we'll be focused on it as we get into the next level of design. What you saw at the last workshop and what we presented today were really kind of high level conceptual ideas, trying to illustrate some of the concepts that we talked through earlier.
Yeah, and I would further add, as we were trying or attempting to solicit feedback with respect to the types of uses and scale of open space that the community sort of wants or desires, we need to take that and sort of overlay it with both the layout of the buildings and the open space. That will actually influence how you lay out the buildings to be both efficient from an actual constructability perspective, as well as a traffic perspective, which I think is what you're alluding to, and I think is a very good point.
Okay. Before we jump back to the written questions, I will note that I believe the stated end time for the session was 7:30, but we'd like to get through as many of the written Q&A as we can. We have some good questions in here, so we're going to extend our time likely to 8 p.m. So if you can stay on, great. We're going to try to get through as many of these questions as we can, and I'll keep an eye out for any raised hands, but we'll kind of start to make our way through the Q&A now. So the first question is, are you willing to work with community partners to approach the state and the city regarding funds for infrastructure costs?
I guess this question probably is going to the development team. So I'll kick it over to you, and it's really kind of a joint question, but why don't you start?
And please feel free to jump in, Joel. From the development side, we're certainly happy to do so. Right, we've been collecting feedback to try to modulate the plan. We've started to think through what does that look like from a public resource perspective, and having continued back and forth and approaching the various sort of governmental agencies which are required to move a project like Atlantic Yards together is something we're very interested in doing. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and I mean, echo all that. We'll need all the support we can get in securing funding for this site. We've said this before at our AYCDC meetings. So we obviously want to secure funding. This would be funding coming from the budget, which is soon will be underway for this year. We're probably talking about a different timeline, but when we have a sense of what's needed, we certainly want to work with our partners at the state, both in the governor's office, of course, but at the state legislature to secure funding.
Next question. What other spaces will the redevelopment offer to the community? For example, public spaces, gardens, community centers.
Joe?
Sure. I'll take this one, Anthony. Well, part of what we're actually soliciting feedback on, both here and in the online survey, is thinking about what types of spaces could be used by the community. When you look at the way that we've relaid out the buildings, we've done something which is called decreasing lot coverage. That is, we've made the buildings taller, but we've actually made their footprints smaller. And that gives us approximately 6 acres of additional open space. We'll be looking to program gardens, rain gardens, various other outdoor public spaces, which hopefully have the right programming and activation to make them both sustainable and useful to the community. And we're also thinking about, and I believe we showed this in our presentation late last year, various different community facility landing points within the first floors of the buildings. Things we're thinking about are an intergenerational center, a meeting space where the community could come together, similar to thoughts around the urban room in the previous plan. And we plan to come back with thoughts around that based on the feedback we've gotten both in these sessions privately and in the online survey when that is complete. So thank you for the question.
What are the opportunities for MWBE businesses and small businesses in the area to supply products for these projects?
Yeah. So, like any ESD project, it will be subject to the state's minority and women-owned business enterprise subcontracting requirements. And typically this is a requirement that 30% of the eligible costs of a project, of a real estate construction project, be awarded and to MWBE New York, I should say New York State certified MWBE firms. So we work with our MWBE department, which actually services the entire state and all state agencies, on helping to create utilization plans and make sure that these goals are met. So that's standard across, all of our projects will cross many state projects in general, and it's something we'll be working with the development team on.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
I was just going to add, Cirrus has partnered with the Building Trades Employers Association, MWBE program to ensure minority and women-owned firms are meaningfully represented. They have actually over 160 MWBE firms. And we mentioned this, but I think it's worth reiterating along the same vein. We've spent quite a bit of time and will continue to spend time thinking about different ways that we can reprogram the first floors of the sites to sort of be conducive to smaller storefronts, which tend to work for local businesses. So different ways to think about it, and still early in the process, but something that we are committed to doing.
Can you remind us, when will this project be completed?
Not soon enough, huh? Right now, I mean, in terms of timeline, the best we can say, we can't really speak to an outside completion date at this point. What we can speak to is when we will anticipate to begin construction on the first portions of this new phase. And as we talked about earlier, that would be, call it late 2027 or early 2028.
To come two parts to this question, what is the fastest path to delivering affordable units, and what are ways you can decrease AMIs?
Joe and Anthony, this is squarely in your presentation. So how about you talk about that?
Sure.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Sure. Let me jump in on the first part. Thank you for your question. I think we're all aligned, in our desire to start construction and deliver housing as soon as possible. As we mentioned in the outset, as we thought about the strategy and the business plan for the project, I mean, that was a key goal. To do that, we're, shifting density to where we think it's most cost effective and efficient to build. Again, namely that's B6, B7, and Site 5, right? Those are the sites that have solid ground versus building over tracks. So the idea would be to start those sites, B6 or B7 and Site 5, while we commence construction of the platform sites. We think that's the fastest path to the delivery of housing. The other thing that we're doing, as Joe had mentioned earlier, and as I mentioned in the opening presentation, is solving for all the prior investment that went into the site, into the foundation elements and utility infrastructure, and trying to design those buildings that best align with those foundation elements, which again could accelerate delivery of those buildings and the platform. So we're working through that, and we're all aligned in the goals. Joel, sorry, I was just going to ask if Joel or Joe had anything to add on that.
Nothing for me.
Nothing on my part. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next question. Of the apartments proposed to be added to the GPP, how many will be affordable and at what income levels?
Joe?
Sure. So the affordable units that we intend to deliver will be across income levels, from low and very low income up to middle income. We propose capping that at 130% of AMI, lower than what was delivered in the past, as some of the other questions have alluded to. There's approximately 3,200 units which have been delivered to date. And so if you increased the balance, the total percentage of those units that would be affordable would have to do with the exact AMI bands and the construction of a feasible project within the variables which we included on the last slide of our presentation.
Will the New York City Parks Department be involved in the development and maintenance of the open spaces?
This is a state property, so the open spaces are not at this point in time anticipated to be operated by the Parks Department. There is the Pacific Park Conservancy. This is an entity that is established as a result of the project and as a requirement of the project. It has a board. Now folks from the development team sit on that board. Other folks from the existing buildings sit on that board in terms of the developers of those buildings. There are seats on that board for the Parks Department, I believe, and local community boards. And really we're making sure that the space and the open space is being operated to a high quality standard. But so to answer the question, no directly on parks operations, but there does exist the Pacific Park Conservancy.
Going back to affordability with this question, what percent of units will be allocated for that 40 to 60% income band? And then what percent of the units allocated to that 40 to 60% income band will be for 2 to 3 bedroom units?
Joe.
Sure. So as I mentioned previously, we intend to allocate units across various income bands, very low income, up to middle and workforce incomes. In terms of the number of units which can be allocated to that particular income band, 40 to 60%, that will be informed by various public programs and the term sheets associated therewith. Also, the costs of the site and the level of public resources which are available to the site. We're continuing to collect information from the community regarding the types of incomes which are needed. We're also studying the membership in the community and thinking through all of that. In terms of the 2 to 3 bed mix, family-sized units, I would expect that percentage, those that we showed on the screen, 20 to 30%, but perhaps we can achieve more, would be fairly constant across income bands. That's not always the case, but given this particular community, we think that could make sense. So thank you for the question.
Next question. What is the pension fund that was mentioned?
So I mentioned various pension funds at the beginning of the presentation. Cirrus Workforce Housing. Our capital comes from the pension funds of various building trade and other unions in and around New York City, including the CWA and others. I believe one of the folks asking the question also mentioned his pension fund, which I believe was the Carpenters.
What role do Greenland, USIF, and Fortress have in this project?
The role of Greenland and USIF, you said?
Yes, and Fortress.
And Fortress, sorry. Joe, can you answer that?
Sure. Greenland was the largest provider of dollars to offset the expenses associated with the extraordinary conditions on this site. So as I mentioned before, Cirrus and Elcor entered this project through purchasing Greenland's debt. By purchasing their debt, we were able to take control of the project, sort of put Greenland to the back of the line, and to move it forward within the common control of Cirrus and Elcor. USIF and Fortress were creditors of Greenland. Similar to things like liquidated damages, which have been mentioned on this call, Greenland owed a lot of folks a lot of money, and they didn't have any. There were many reasons for that. Part of it was COVID. Part of it was certain types of management. And going forward, the project is owned and controlled by Cirrus and Elcor. Thank you for the question.
Will working families be able to afford the affordable units?
Joe?
Sure. When you look at the various types of units which we hope to program into this site, we're hoping that many of those units are affordable to working families. I think that some of the examples I gave before of a social worker and their partner, of a nurse and a firefighter, or a restaurant worker with their child, having a place to live in a new, well-designed building, dignified housing, makes a lot of sense for the site. Cirrus is mission-driven capital, and we were put into business by various union pension funds to reinvest within the very communities that the families of their members, working families, live in. With the thought being that they could be investing in the very housing and units that ultimately serves their members. So that's the goal. Joel has mentioned, and I think others have mentioned, these types of developments take significant, time, effort, and energy, not just from the developer and not just from ESD, from other governmental agencies. And we're here with Elcor and our collective expertise to try to do that in an efficient, reasonable, transparent, and quick manner, which is one of the kind of biggest themes we've consistently heard, do it quickly. So thank you for the question.
Are you committed to sharing a summary of survey answers so that we can see and read what you read from and about us?
Summary of survey answers. We'll take that question as we work through the what will be the community visioning report, the summary of this engagement. So noted on the question, and we'll think through that as we prepare that report.
What will be done to prevent negative impacts on the Pacific Street Bears Garden from neglect by the B5 site owners?
Joe and Anthony.
So I think in that question you're referring to Site 5, right? So there's B1 and
Site 5,
which are adjacent.
Yeah.
We're thinking through different ways that we can mitigate the effect on the garden. You can do that with various mitigating measures. We still haven't fully designed Site 5. And so it's hard to say at this point exactly what those measures would be. What we can say is that we're committed to continue to meet with the folks at Bears Garden and to have an ongoing dialogue around that.
I'm going to jump a question for my back of house team because it's related to Site 5 now that we're talking about it. Are you going to transfer bulk from B1 to Site 5?
So I'm happy to take that one. The kind of feasible proposal that was put forth does anticipate the transfer of bulk from B1 to Site 5. When B1 was originally designed, it was intended to have a significant portion of commercial and to be a tall building directly in front of what is now the Barclays Center, as well as the MTA entrance, which I think in general, folks that we've spoken to don't think that makes sense today. The plans for this have changed over time. And so we do think it makes sense to transfer bulk from Site 5 to B1. And that proposal was in that vein.
Will the Pacific Park Conservancy be made more accessible to residents?
Well, we talked about the Conservancy earlier. The Conservancy, we talked about the makeup of that board and the meetings that it has. I guess if the question is regarding kind of communication, if there are issues, what numbers to reach, is there a number to reach an email? I know Joe and Anthony, you've been putting that into motion. So that kind of communication and back and forth with the Conservancy is in place. Is that correct?
Yes. So I think most people who followed this project recognize that the previous developer, Greenland, were not the easiest people to get a hold of. Since we came on the project recently, the Conservancy has retained a group called Town Square to manage the current open space as well as the sidewalks around the platform sites 1120 and 1121. There will also shortly be a phone number and email where Town Square can be contacted, and concerns or complaints can be directed to the appropriate folks, whether it's the Conservancy, whether it's the developer team. So look for that in the short future.
Right. While we're nearing the end of our session, I did, before everyone logs off, did just want to remind people that the survey will be open through end of the day tomorrow. So you have that link in the chat. You can, if your question didn't get answered, we really do welcome feedback via that survey. I have one written question, and then we'll jump to hand raises. How can we ensure the project makes significant changes to Atlantic Avenue to make a safer crossing?
Joe?
Sure. So if you're familiar with, for example, the Atlantic Avenue rezoning, The DOT has been studying various parts of Atlantic Avenue with respect to different public realm improvements that could make the pedestrian experience not only more pleasant, but also safer. Atlantic Avenue is a wide road. I believe it's 150 feet, making it one of the wider in NYC. It is something that we are very interested in working with various interested stakeholders, whether it be government, surrounding community, folks like downtown Brooklyn who want to see the pedestrian experience from both a safety and a usability perspective improve to make that happen. We think it's good for the community and also good for the development as a whole.
I see we have a raised hand, so I'll ask Julie Briggs to ask her question.
Hi, thank you. This is really quick, but I'm not able to access the link to the survey. Can you check if that's correct?
That is a good flag. Yes, we will check on that.
It's taking me to an Ayurvedic yoga survey.
Not us. Yeah, we'll double check that and maybe we can follow up on the chat in just a minute.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right. While we check on that, we can ask another question from the written Q&A. Will the platform be built while Site 5 is being built?
Joe and Anthony, can you answer this one?
Sure. Anthony, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in. Thanks for the question. The current phasing plan, again, with the goal of delivering housing sooner, is to commence construction on the sites that have solid ground first, right? So that would be Site 5 and B6 and/or B7. The hope is that we could also commence construction of the platform simultaneously. Decoupling the platform from the delivery of those sites could accelerate the delivery of housing, while also starting the platform, which will be essential for the open space and some of the community facilities.
Will there be a local preference for current residents, displaced residents, or specific industries, for example, teachers?
Joe?
Sure. So depending on the type of affordability program that a building is enrolled in, whether that's state or city, there is typically local preference. Please don't quote me on the numbers. I'd have to look it up, but I think it varies usually between 15 and 20%. In New York City, there's also municipal worker housing set-asides around specific industries. Those are not things which we as developer control. They have to do with things like fair housing and the policies of New York City and state, though they're baked in most what I would call affordable housing programs.
Could BSE Global fund a quality of life enforcement unit? Could other benefits be extracted?
I'll take that. BSE obviously is an important part of this project, an important stakeholder, and we look forward to, discussing how their role in the project can continue to evolve as we move forward in developing this plan for the rest of the sites, and going through that public review process.
I will note for the survey question, just double check that you're using the link bit.ly/AY_survey. I do believe this is the correct link, but we'll double check for you. But just make sure that you have that underscore in there. It looks like we're resending the link. Great. Okay. We do have about 5 minutes, so we're going to get through as many of these questions as we can until we close out. But we'll probably have only a few more questions. Will the buildings block the sun?
I'll take that one. And Joe, if you want to add anything. This is all studied as part of the environmental review. There's shadow impacts or shadow studies and urban design, visual corridor studies that are done as part of the environmental review. So that will all be analyzed, and we'll see what those impacts are, on the surrounding portion, on these sites and the surrounding areas of the site.
Next question, will there be parking facilities for the public? We have a parking issue as homeowners.
Joe, can you speak to this one?
Sure. So we would anticipate adding some additional parking. This is a very transit-rich development area. It's one of the reasons that we think development makes sense here at scale. In terms of the amount of parking, that will be informed by a traffic study, which will be part of the EIS. I would say that in general, New York City development has been reducing parking per unit and encouraging the use of public transportation. But this is a very dense area, and we would anticipate having some parking in the project.
All right, next question, potentially very relevant for our upcoming weekend. Who will be responsible for managing snow removal on sidewalks around the project site?
All right, yeah, this is definitely not a me question. Joe and Anthony.
So as mentioned previously, Town Square is managing both the current open space as well as the maintenance of the sidewalks around the project site. Snow clearing with respect to Site 5 is done by the current tenancy. And so it's really the developer team. So I would anticipate no problems this weekend. We get various updates, but certainly let us know if there are.
All right, I do think this will be our last question for the evening. So last question, how will you begin to deal with currently high winds and avoid building in a way that creates additional wind shear?
All right, Joe, take that one, please.
Anthony?
Joe, yeah, I'm happy to.
Anthony, sorry.
Sure.
No problem. Happy to jump in here. Great question. Like with any project of scale, with buildings of this height, wind has to be extensively studied, which is something we'll do as part of the design process. There are things we can do in terms of building positioning, as well as materials that we can use as part of the open space design that could mitigate any impacts. So those things will be extensively studied as part of the next phase of the design.
All right. Thank you all so much. To everyone that participated, thank you for spending your evening. Thanks for the wide array of questions that you submitted. We really appreciate them. As Joel mentioned, we will have the next workshop sometime in February, so please stay tuned for that exact time and date. But again, thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening.